It's the Xdobo Wave 1983, one of the weirdest named speakers probably there's ever been. 1983. Why is it called 1983? I'm pretty sure it's not that old. And why am I reviewing it? Why have I got it in this video? Well, because the Bogasing, I've been liking the Bogasing M4. As long as you know, below 50%, let's go default mode. Above 50%, let's go what they call super bass mode, but it's really the Alan Ross balance mode. And then if you really need the volume, you go back to default mode, because super bass mode, balance mode, doesn't go that loud. And you've been saying to me, but there's a load of speakers like that, they all look the same, must be the same. Well, we already tried one of them, which you said was Transmart Element Force. When you've actually got them side by side, they're not alike at all. The guts is probably the same, but the casing is not the same. This has a much more of a rubberized feel, and it's slightly larger. The Transmart Element Force, like many of the Transmarts, well, I've reviewed one Transmart before, and it was basically a job to dump in the bin. This is another one. It's going to basically go in the bin. I'm never going to be listening to this. It's not that good, in my opinion. And then there was this Xdobo Wave 1983. And actually, this does look more like it's a clone of the Bogasing M4. But still, the Bogasing M4 is slightly bigger, but that's due to the fact that it's got this big rubberized surround. So that's going to take a knock better than the Xdobo Wave 1983. Which does, it's slightly rubberized, but not as thick in the rubberization as the Bogasing M4. Now, they are identical when it comes to the controls. Power button, mode button. Oh, mode. What's that mean? Well, I'll tell you what it means. It means on the back of the Xdobo, identical to the other two speakers, you get the USB-C charging, you've got a micro SD slot. You can use a flash card and get your music straight off the device. An auxiliary input, so old fashioned now, but they've got an auxiliary input. So that's identical. And the other, well, let's talk about the modes. Right, EQ. So I'm saying they're identical. EQ, volume down, volume, a play button, pause button, plus up, volume up. And the microphone button, dedicated microphone button, it will call up your voice assistant. However, on my Samsung S10, it calls up Bixby. I don't want it to call up Bixby, and I don't really use it. But I'll tell you why I thought this one was probably maybe a clone of the Bogasing M4. The Transmart does have passive radiator front and passive radiator back, but the Bogasing only has a passive radiator on the back. And you guys said to me, but I can see there's this. I haven't got the Bogasing at all in my head. The Bogasing has a shadow of what looks like passive radiator on the front, but it does have a passive radiator on the back. And you said to me, why are you saying it's only got a passive radiator on the back when it clearly has what looks like a passive radiator on the front? And then the answer is, take the grill off, you can see that's just a piece of metal shaped to look like a passive radiator. It's a fake passive radiator. Why on earth would you fake a passive radiator? I've no idea. Answers on the postcard. Gonna have to ask Bogasing. But it's exactly the same thing on the Xdobo. When I saw they did that, when I saw that the Xdobo had exactly the same fake passive radiator, I thought maybe they are identical speakers. They are identical if you go on Amazon.com, you're going to be paying $60. That's good. So $60, 50 quid, and that's what I'm reviewing them at. Is it a £50 contender? I do think the 50. If I had 50 quid and that cost 50 quid, and what was my Soundcore Boost being my current former £50 champion, I would say I'd rather spend the money on the Bogasing M4. Bear in mind, Bogasing M4 is bigger than the Soundcore Boost. However, in the UK, not available at the moment, but when it was available, they were asking 70 quid. 70 quid, no longer viable, but in the UK, 45 quid, or the 45 quid equivalent, I got this off AliExpress, is what you're going to be paying for that. But all the specs do look like they're the same. Are they the same? The first thing we're going to have to do is have a look at the frequency response measurements. Default mode, you don't need me to tell you. I'd say a massively upward sloping looking frequency response. That's a bright sound. Where is the bass? There isn't even bass adjustment to any extent. Lower volumes, so-called bass mode. Well, that's just quieter than the default mode, and they've just brought down the highs. That's really, really strange. They brought down the highs and the bass on so-called bass mode, but it may sound a bit more bass heavy simply because it's more linear. It's quite linear, actually. That's already looking like the balanced mode, except still, look, the bass is rolling off from just below 200 hertz. That's crazy. And so-called vocal mode, again, just looks like an even brighter default mode, and that's going to be a waste of time looking at. So yeah, just like the Bogasing, we've got 3 modes. They call them the tri modes or something silly like that. Default mode has no light at all. Vocal mode on both of them is the white LED. And then bass mode on both of them is the blue LED. However, Bogasing M4 called it super bass mode. They call it bass mode. You can see the frequency response. It's not bass mode. In fact, it looks really, really weird on the Xdobo because on the bass mode, they've reduced the bass. But along with reducing the bass, they've reduced the highs and the mids as well. So, okay, it's a bit more bass heavy, but it's certainly not a bass mode speaker or EQ because they've actually reduced the bass on that. It looks really weird. So what is it in reality? How do they sound? Is it a Bogasing clone, or is it even better than my current £50 champion? I would say, because if you put a gun at my head, I'd have to say, why are you doing that? And then I'd say, okay, 50 quid, you put a gun to my head, I've got 50 quid, what am I going to spend it on? If it was 50 quid in the UK, it would be the Bogasing M4, but not if it's 70 quid. But in the US, if it's the $60 Soundcore Boost Bogasing M4, yeah. I'm finding it more satisfying on the Bogasing M4 if you just remember to switch modes. So, what do they sound like? Around 50% comparison.
I'm giving you the green light. You. Give me the green light. I know you want to. I'm giving you the green light. I wanna feel you. Give me the green light. You know you want to. It's 12 to take your shot, you're leaning in, don't stop, I'm not good at your dreams, we're picking out our rings, so get down on your knees, I'm giving you the green light, I wanna feel you, give me the green light, you know you want to, I'm giving you the green light.
Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. It's the same thing as we already had with the Tron Smart. They look the same, almost designed the same, appear to be the same guts, but it sounds different on the Bogasing M4. So, we've got nice bass impact on the Bogasing M4. That is missing on the Xdobo, which sounds thin and brittle. And the differences are huge. 4 decibels difference in the bass. Advantage to the Bogasing M4. So, it's already not looking good for the Xdobo. That was default mode. We know what they call the bass mode is their balance mode. So maybe when we adjust for volume, we have them both in a balance mode. But I have to say, it's so much quieter, even the balance mode on the Xdobo Wave 1983. 65% volume for super bass mode on the Bogasing M4. It's equivalent of 85% on the Xdobo Wave 1983. There's a huge difference in the volumes. Let's have a listen. So we're around 65 to 85% of volume.
Damn, burning box, smoke bands. Always been the MO since the start of this, and now I'm on a mission like I'm Artemis. Hey, we gon' turn the crib into a club like Hennessy and Buddha screaming thug life. Get it, baby, you know I'm a plug right, but I got a feeling that it's gonna be a long night. Never an average night.
24 hours up in the day, I gotta make it right. 18 of those, I'm in the cave, I gotta make some light, make it hype. Even if we break at night, and even if things go left, we gotta make them right. Chillin' with mine, we triple up, ain't on the double up, triple dub. Came from the basement, we only going up. They loving us, up in the booth, I'm getting dizzy, but they the cup is up. Toast to my people that's wanna come up and you live with us. Ain't all about the trick of bus. Looking at my watch, your spirit bomb, both hands is going up. You going coast to coast with us. See the flows is flowing, overflowing, yeah, the cup it runneth over. Tidal wave up in the ocean.
We gon' turn the crib into a club like Hennessy and Buddha screaming thug life. Get it, baby, you know I'm the plug, right? But I got a feeling that it's gonna be a long night.
You don't need me to tell you, by a country mile, well, in my opinion, if you like any amount of bass, Head and Shoulders, not just better in terms of volume, because we're only at 60, we've got miles more headroom, 65% versus 85% in terms of volume, but the bass is so much bigger on the Bogasing M4. It's 4 decibels up in the upper bass, 1 decibel up in lower bass, but in terms of bass extension, at 50 hertz with 4 decibels up on the Bogasing M4. It's a thinner sound because we've got 2 decibels more in the terms of mids on the Xdobo. So they favour mids over bass. If that's important to you, if you don't like bass and you love your mids, you're going to fall in love with the Xdobo. But me personally, this is Head and Shoulders the better listen at around 85 to 65% volume. So back to a maximum volume. The volume modes are the default modes. I'm only going to test default mode. We know that really doesn't go loud at all on the Xdobo in what is the balance mode, the bass mode. We're already at 85%. We know default mode also goes much louder on the Bogasing M4. So if you absolutely want volume, because it's not going to be balanced in default mode on either of them, here's the test of maximum volume in default modes.
I only call you when it's half past 5, the only time I'd ever call you. I only love it when you touch me, I feel me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me, baby. I'ma let you know and keep it simple. Tryna keep it up don't seem so simple. I just fucked 2 bitches before I saw you, and you gon' have to do it at my tempo. Always tryna send me off to rehab. Drugs started feeling like it's decaf. I'm just tryna live life for the moment, and all these motherfuckers wanna relapse. I only call you when it's half past 5, the only time that I'll be by your side. I only love it when you touch me, I feel me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me, yeah. I only call you when it's half past 5, the only time I'd ever call you mine. I only love it when you touch me, I feel me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me when I'm fucked up. That's the real me, baby. The hills have eyes, the hills have eyes. Who are you to judge?
Almost the same in terms of overall loudness. 15.6 LUFS, 15.8 LUFS on the Xdobo. About the same in perceived volume terms, but bigger peak by 2 decibels on the Xdobo. And there is a difference now in the bass, and kind of the advantage goes to the Xdobo. At 50 hertz, it's 2 decibels up on the M4 now. And although the bass is thicker and wider, if we look around here on the M4, there's a bigger peak. Although it's a thinner bass, there's a bigger peak at the 50 hertz on the Xdobo. They are both distortion machines, and if we actually look at the noise floor, it's actually higher on the M4. So both distortion machines, but it's even worse on the M4. In terms of highs, it does extend higher on the M4, while we've got stronger mids on the Xdobo. But neither of them are a great listen in any way. It's just about volume, and because they're so-called bass modes, which are the more balanced modes, don't go very loud at all, I'm just using default mode for maximum volume testing. So, I mean, neither of them sound good at all. There is huge amounts of distortion in default mode on both of them. It's going to sound a lot cleaner in default modes, in the balance modes, bass mode, but it's not going to go loud at all in bass mode, and it'll go a little bit louder, super bass mode, on the Bogasing M4, but if you need more volume, you're going to have to go to default mode. The Bogasing M4 is noisier, but they're both a distortion fest. It's not a good listen, but you've got the volume if that's what you really need. And weirdly, now, there's an advantage in deeper bass to the Xdobo. Not that you're really going to notice that over all that distortion and noise that's going on. However, there is more bass on the Xdobo, and there's more upper bass now on the M4, more mids on the Xdobo, and more highs on the Bogasing M4. Overall, for my money, the Bogasing M4 is a decent listen when you are switching modes, and bear that in mind. And this is going, the Xdobo Wave 1983 appears to be a clone, to be honest, in terms of the guts. I mean, even if we look at the loudness, they're just tuned different. It's almost the same in LUFS, 15.6, 15.8, almost exactly the same. It does appear just the processing inside is the difference. How they're getting that out of the Bogasing M4, and yet they couldn't get that out of the Xdobo, I don't know. But it's going the same way as a Tronsmart Element Force. That's not a decent listen. I don't like that. I don't like this one either. But I do really like the Bogasing M4. I find it a satisfying listen. If you're paying $60, if you're paying 50 quid, then it's a decent value. And bear in mind, it does have a nice rubberized surround. I would be confident that would take, smallish knocks. Hit it with a hammer. Don't sue me if it breaks, but I do like the speaker. I'm not going to deny it, but it does have a lot of shortcomings, especially in default mode. Default mode only really works well below 50%. Now, in terms of the specs, already mentioned, they're both about $60. Let's bring it back. I haven't thrown you away yet. Both about $60. But in the UK, the Bogasing M4, they were asking 70 quid. That's too much money. Then it no longer is my 50 quid champion. And the clue is 50 quid is not 70 quid. And here we are. Why I'm saying they appear to be actually the same guts. They both have a 24.4 watt-hour battery, both SBC codec, both Bluetooth 5, both do stereo pairing, both have USB-C connection, both have an auxiliary input. Neither of them can be used as a power bank. Both of them can be used as a phone speaker. Both of them are rated officially at 40 watts. However, officially, the Xdobo Wake charges at 5 volts, 1 amp, and what I could see was 5 volts, 2 amps spec'd out on the M4. Mate, is there a difference, or have I got that wrong, or have they put the specs down wrong? And the weight's slightly different because there is more rubberized of a surround on the Bogasing M4, but hey ho, it's actually the lighter speaker. 731 grams versus 752 grams. That's me weighing it on my scales. Here's the great thing: they both float. They both float because they're both IPX7 rated to 1 meter 30 minutes. But hey, they float, and they float with the drivers up, so you can have them in a pool. It will float, and it's playable. That isn't common enough for me. When people claim IPX7, they will drop to the bottom of a 10 meter pool. What good is that then being rated to 1 meter? They both float. Now I've got down a difference here in what they're claiming for frequency. Yes, it's absolutely meaningless for frequency response if they do not tell you plus or minus what the range of that frequency response is, but they do name it a little bit different. Xdobo say 80 to 18 kilohertz, whereas they say 50 to 20 kilohertz. But what range? Therefore, it's absolutely meaningless. Both said to have two 45mm drivers and one passive radiator. The other difference was slightly better. When I tested on YouTube for latency, the Bogasing M4, I'm getting 150 milliseconds, 110 milliseconds for the Xdobo Wave 1983. Neither of them are usable. As I always say, my cutoff personally is 80 milliseconds, but both of them, you will notice that there is a lag in lip sync. Both of them on my personal testing. Remember, scenario and device, very specific when it comes to Bluetooth latency, but neither of them, for me, were any good for streaming on YouTube. There you go. You know what the takeaway is. Takeaway is, all these speakers you're saying are not clones. Well, they're tuned different at a minimum. Bogasing has the the Bogasing M4 has the bass that I'm finding satisfying, which is completely missing. On the two clones you've told me about, that I've personally tested, they don't have any bass of note at all. Whereas that was what struck me about the M4, was a satisfying bass, and that's what makes it a great listen for me. So the takeaway is, Alan, there's a gun to your head, and tell us, you've got 50 quid, what are you going to spend it on? Yes, it would be the Bogasing M4, it wouldn't be the Soundcore Boost. Just bear in mind, if I'm travelling and I'm travelling light, I may well still take the Soundcore Boost. They're both a decent buy at 50 quid, but if your budget is really limited at 50 quid, and you actually get it for 50 quid or $60, the takeaway is, the Bogasing M4 is me, personally, one I would choose. I'm not saying it's the best buy. I'm saying it's what me, Alan Ross Reviews, would buy. My personal taste. Understand my personal taste. Then you'll know if it's going to suit you or not. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in another video.
I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife. Got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I ain't about that. I ain't about that life.